At this point, you should have read sections 15.3, 4, and 5, which introduce our rectangle class and some instantiation code. And it points out that an instance can contain another instance within it. It also points out that not only can you pass instances as parameters, but you can also return them from functions. And it makes the point that objects are mutable. That means we can change the objects. Similar to lists, you can change the individual elements of lists. And now what we're doing is we've been asked to write a function, moveRectangle, which will actually change the corner location of that rectangle. Let's go see how that works. Here's the code that we've seen so far, the point class, the rectangle class, and the instantiation code. Let's define our function, moveRectangle, using the def keyword, moveRectangle, and it takes 3 parameters. The reference to the rectangle instance, the distance along the x-axis, and the distance along the y-axis. Now, because the objects are mutable, all we need to do is reference the rectangles and find that corner attribute, and then get the x attribute of the corner attribute of that rectangle, and just change it by the dx amount, the distance along the x-axis that we want to change it. Notice we use the dot notation together to reference an attribute, x, within an instance, corner, which is itself an attribute of an instance. And similarly, we can do the same thing to change the y dimension. So that's the function moveRectangle. Let's go ahead and call it moveRectangle. Remember, you call it using the objects that are defined in the global frame. So we'll call it with box. And then let's move it 25 points on the x-axis and 50 points on the y-axis. And we'll visualize that. So as we step through, we create the reference to the point class, the rectangle class, our function, and then we instantiate an instance of the rectangle and assign 2 attributes, the height and the width values. And then we actually create a new instance of a point as an attribute of the box, and we then assign values to the x and y attributes of that corner. We just initialize them to 0. Now we're going to call our moveRectangle function to move it a little bit. When we call the function, remember that it creates a new frame. Notice that the integers, since they're primitive objects, are passed as just integers. They're copied and passed. But the reference to the instance is the exact same reference that we saw in the main, in the global part of the program. So box and rect point at the same instance. So remember, this is an example of aliasing, where 2 different references, 2 different variables reference the same instance. And that is actually what gives us the ability to change the location of this object, of this rectangle, by going in and changing the x and y values. So let's step through that a little bit more. As we run the code, we can now see it's going to find the x attribute of the corner attribute of the rect and just add dx, which in this case is 25. And so it changes the x attribute, similarly changes the y attribute. There's no explicit return statement, so it returns none, and that's the end of the thing. Notice that that frame goes away after we return, and that is your moveRectangle function.